Hello everyone and welcome to our new episode of the Expat Career and Lifestyle podcast. This is Dominika, your host, and today I am coming to you with another special guest, Katheryn Gronauer. She is an executive trainer and coach who helps global professionals live, work, and thrive in Japan. She is the founder of Thrive Tokyo, and she has been featured in Women's Health, HuffPost, Mind, Body, Green, and numerous publications. And today with Katheryn, we are going to speak about how to thrive in Tokyo and in Japan, how to adapt to life in Tokyo, and how to create a career or a business. So welcome, Katheryn. I am really happy and excited to have you here on our show. So if you can please tell us more about you and what are you doing?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So hello to everybody who's listening. My name is Katheryn, and I help people live, work, and thrive in Japan. So I do a combination of cross-cultural education training, and I also work with people, either professionals or families, on a one-to-one basis to help them, learn about the culture here in Japan and also kind of build their day-to-day life. I also have a background in wellness coaching. So I originally started my business with the aim to be a health coach. But then I found that a lot of foreigners in Japan actually don't know how to shop for groceries. So I decided to take one step back and say, okay, let me just help you learn how to live here. And then we can segue into helping you with your health and wellness. But I was discovering, people were also dealing with issues related to culture shock. So that really kind of, helped me evolve my business. And now I work with corporations as well as individuals.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so you have like this experience of living into cultures and growing up between US and also Japan. So like how this upbringing was for you, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, that is a really great question, because I think now that I'm an adult and I can look back on my childhood upbringing, I can really see how I had two different cultural identities that were forming at the same time. And I remember when I was growing up, though, I felt a lot of conflict. One second I'm in Japan and everybody's telling me that I need to pay attention to detail. I need to be more aware of my surroundings. I need to think of other people first before I take action on something. And then I would go back to the United States, and then people would tell me the opposite. They would say, stop being such a worrywart, have more of an opinion, be more assertive, show more confidence. And so I was constantly kind of growing up between these two different messages, and it really impacted, how I felt and how I was acting in different circumstances. And it was only since becoming a cross-cultural trainer that I actually learned more about myself through helping other people learning about Japanese culture. So yeah, I think that was kind of a big learning about just my upbringing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's very interesting, like living between completely two different countries and two different cultures, because for example, when you are moving within Europe, it's more or less the same, but when you are like growing up between US and also Japan or any other country, it's interesting, and it's different that you have those two identities that you are living. So well done for that, like learning and also exploring. So because now you are helping like people who are moving to Japan, like expats who are moving to Japan. So like based on your experience and based on your work, so how to prepare for this transition, like what we have to learn before moving to Japan?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. I always find it's different depending on who I'm working with, because, most expats are probably only going to be in Japan for anywhere from 1 to 5 years. That's usually kind of the contract length that they might have. And that's the the way I interact with them might be different from someone who is moving here for a job where they don't have any end in their contract, or maybe even, college students who are coming here for several years. They all have very different mindsets related to coming to the country. But I would say that the thing that's kind of the standard for all of them is that you probably definitely want to pick up some Japanese phrases before you come here. There's still a really big language barrier. And so most people, what happens is they just focus on trying to move to Japan, and they're so busy with moving, with getting their house set up, with trying to get their kids into the schools and all those things, that they don't really start trying to sit down and learn the language until maybe a few months have passed into moving here. And by then, it takes such a long time to try to pick up basic phrases. So you might find yourself spending the first 6 months in Japan really feeling limited because you can't really interact with anybody. So even just learning some, survival skills or survival Japanese, I guess you could say, before you come here, that can really help people with their initial transition.
Yeah, so it must be difficult to learn Japanese.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's the most challenging about the Japanese language is that there's many different ways of saying the same thing depending on who you're speaking to. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a hierarchical type of society. And there's, the way you would talk to a customer is very different than how you would talk to a colleague, and how you would talk to your boss is very different from how you would speak to a subordinate. And that's all different from how you would speak to your family members. So even though everybody can probably relate to how your relationships shift depending who you're speaking to, in Japanese, there's the added layer of having a different phrase or a different way to say things depending on who that person is. So there's a lot of layers to the language for sure.
Yes, and you have to pay attention, exactly, to those details.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so what do you see are the main differences between the Western, let's say the Western culture, the Western world, and the Japanese? What do you see?
Yeah, I would say that in Japan, it's definitely more relationship focused, whereas in a place like the United States, it's maybe more task or result oriented and focused. So what that means is in Japan, you might spend a lot more time trying to develop a relationship with people to establish that sense of trust before you feel like you've really made a friend or you've made a good business connection. Whereas in a place like the United States, it's really more transactional in the relationships. It's more like, okay, what do you provide? How does that satisfy me? What can I give back to you? So I think that relationships are a lot maybe quicker to form. You can really connect with people pretty easily. But those relationships might come and go. They might not last beyond whatever project you're working on or whatever circumstance that you're in. So yeah, I would say that that's probably a really big element to Japan. One of the, most important values is harmony. So because people think about harmony, that means that there's an emphasis put on relationships and how you think about other people. So yeah, I would say that's the number one thing.
Yeah. So for example, when you are doing business with Japanese people, when you are going to meetings or dinners or lunches, this is important, to build relationship, not go directly to business, but speak about your family or what are you doing, your day-to-day life.
Yeah, exactly. So it's more about developing the relationships. You might not, if you're meeting someone for the first time and you're trying to make a sale, for example, you might not start off by pitching your business and talking about the benefits of your business. You might actually just start trying to develop a relationship with that person who you're interacting with. And also on top of that, what that means is the key stakeholders might not necessarily be in the room with you, or you might think you're talking to the key stakeholder, but because it's more of a collectivist society, the person you're interacting with might actually have to run your ideas by other people internally before getting back to you. So that can also kind of cause a little bit of a delay or a little bit more time in getting answers and moving projects forward. So again, it all comes down to relationships.
Yeah. And it's also like when it comes to looking for a job or like within educational environment, like university, this is the same.
Yes, I would say that's the same as well. For getting jobs too, sometimes it's easier to start new projects or start new adventures if you have a connection. So if you know someone who knows someone, that's probably an easier way of getting in than it could be just to apply for something without having any connection to it. But I would say it really depends. Like if you're looking for a job here, a lot of companies, especially global companies that are located here, do have the, resume process just the same as any other location. So you can apply for things, but if you do know someone internally, that's definitely a big plus.
Okay. Yeah. So like what to avoid like during those like conversations or like meeting with or like day-to-day life, like what to avoid within Japanese culture, like for example, I don't know what not to say or how to say it, like to avoid those, like sometimes those are like funny situations, but they can cost you like a business or they can cost you like a job.
Yeah, I would say, there's so many kind of instances I can think of where people might have made some cultural mistakes. I guess you could call them, or cultural faux pas, but I wouldn't say there's like a huge thing per se to avoid necessarily. But in general, we really notice that sometimes non-Japanese people might speak a lot, like they're talking and talking and talking, and Japanese people tend to listen more than they speak. So they're kind of waiting for an opportunity to speak or be acknowledged. So I would say one thing I see happens quite often is usually non-Japanese are just talking a lot. But you could really benefit from doing a little bit more listening. So asking more questions, trying to allow the other person to speak. I think that's really beneficial to developing the relationship. And be just mindful that just because the other person's quiet doesn't mean you should keep talking. You should probably ask them more about themselves too.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I would say has caused a problem for many people, and this is relatively small, but it always becomes a big issue, is probably just with trash separation and recycling here in Japan. So I can't tell you how many people have said they've had problems with neighbors who have been very passive aggressive, and they found out later that it was because they weren't separating the trash properly. So trash, for some reason, is this really interesting topic where I don't think Japanese people realize that the way they separate trash is actually like a Japanese thing, or it's like unique to being in Japan. Like Japanese people know that most foreigners don't know that they should take their shoes off before they enter a house, or they don't know the proper way to exchange a business card, or, there's very general like Japanese etiquette things that they are aware that foreigners don't know of. But one of those things that a lot of people don't know about is trash separation. So, for example, I know of a case where a woman was being very passive aggressive to her foreign roommate, share housemate. And it turned out that the foreigner was not taking off the label on those PET bottles. So if you have like a plastic water bottle, you should like, let's say you have an Evian bottle, you're supposed to take off the label, the Evian label, and you're also supposed to separate the cap as well. So you actually have 3 pieces of trash, not just one. And usually if you're coming from a place like, let's say the United States, you think, oh, as long as I put my plastic bottle in a plastic bottle or recycling bin, I'm fine. But actually there's additional steps involved here in Japan. So yeah, very small topic, but it seems to be like a very big problem if you don't know that you're supposed to be separating things.
Yeah, we don't have this like this additional steps to recycle like a plastic bottle even here in Europe. So it's good to know.
Yeah. Exactly. Good to know.
Yeah. So like what are like the best ways? So listening, asking questions, like learning about like about the culture. So like other ways to build like a meaningful relationship with Japanese people.
Yeah, I would say that it really takes a long time, but I would say trying to again, just trying to be empathetic towards the other person, saying, oh, you must have had a tough day yesterday or something like that. Just trying to be like more mindful and acknowledging like their perspective. I think that really helps develop a better connection. Also, in Japan, they're really big on things like gift giving. So if you ever visit somebody's house, you want to bring something with you to give like as a little gift or a token. One thing people find really unusual in Japan is if you want to meet up with a Japanese friend, and you say, hey, do you want to get together and have coffee? They might say to you, okay, how about 3 weeks from now on Tuesday at 2:30 p.m.? So they're very like organized and very structured with their schedule. And typically your schedule is like very busy because they're very work oriented. Mm-hmm. So their time tends to be limited for more social outings, and they might not be available to just do things very sporadically or to do things spontaneously. So you might find that that also takes longer to get to know people because you have to wait a few weeks in advance to really like plan to actually meet and interact. But when they do, they're very serious. Like they've blocked out like a lot of time to really spend with you. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it should be like a special interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like a very organized event. Yeah. Like meeting with. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that like most people who are trying to make friendships with Japanese people, if you don't speak Japanese, that means that you're probably interacting with someone who's speaking in English, which means they have probably more of a global mindset or an interest and a curiosity in your own culture. So it's probably a lot easier to form those relationships with people who are internationally minded than it would be if you were speaking Japanese and trying to interact with someone who has like no knowledge of another mm-hmm. language or been abroad. So I think that on that note, most people who are listening would probably not have that big of a challenge to interact with the Japanese people they're connecting with here, especially if they're using English.
Yeah. So like, what do you see like working with your clients and like helping people to adapt to Japanese culture? So do you see like people have this cultural shock when they come to Tokyo or to Japan, and how to like overcome it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the experience that most people have is kind of a typical expat curve where mm-hmm. when they first come to Japan, they're in that honeymoon phase. So everything in Tokyo, it's like really exciting. It's very unusual, very different. There's a lot of unusual things to explore. It also has a lot of polarities. So like 1 second you'll see like Japanese businessmen dressed in suits and they all look kind of robotic going to their work. But then after work, they're all having a great time. And there's a lot of entertainment district and very interesting, unusual fashions and things to see. So there's just so much to explore. And a lot of people who move to Japan usually have a very exciting time for the first, several months of being here with a lot to explore. But then after that, they definitely settle into culture shock. And usually that's the point in time where they realize that they should probably stop eating out every single night and trying all the restaurants. They should maybe start to develop their own routine. But then they realize they don't know how to use any of the functions in their kitchen. They don't know mm-hmm. how to shop for food. They don't know where that yoga class is to go to, or whatever things that they find meaningful to them about, creating their day-to-day lifestyle. They kind of realize there's a lot of learning curve and a lot to kind of set up for themselves. So that's really what happens in terms of the lifestyle aspect. And I would say from a business aspect too, probably about 6 months in, people think, oh, Japanese people are so nice. They're really like enjoying the company. Everybody's been really like hospitable. But then they start to realize that maybe they've pitched some ideas of things that could be different. And people say like, listen and say, yeah. And they nod their head, but they don't really pick up on it. And so there's a lot of frustrations around that as well. So I would say those are kind of the bigger things that people experience for culture shock. And I usually like to tell people that I don't think of culture shock as people learning about another culture mm-hmm. and having like an, oh my goodness moment. I actually think of culture shock as a moment where you are learning about yourself. And it's an opportunity to reflect on yourself. So, for example, if someone is saying to me, oh gosh, Japanese people are so slow, why is this process taking so long? I might say instead of telling them the reasons why a process might be taking longer, instead I like to ask them, what's the rush? Why are you in a hurry? Why does it have to be done right now? I tried to pose that question back to them from their perspective. And that really gets people thinking like, okay, actually, why am I trying to move fast on this? Where does that come from? How come in my culture, we like to be speedy in relation to Japan? And I think that gives people a really good opportunity to kind of reflect for themselves.
Yeah, it's a nice way. Like, so it's like an opportunity to learn more about you, to this time of reflection when you are having like a cultural shock, which is normal, like even moving like within Europe or within states. I think like moving from one state to another, it's different. So there is always an opportunity to learn more about you.
And most people say that they say they want to move to another country to have an adventure, like a once in a lifetime opportunity to learn about yourself. Well, those hard times, the challenging times where you have the culture shock, that's actually when you're learning about your own habits, your own behavior, your own identity, and you can question it and you can ask yourself, okay, if I was actually raised here, like born and raised in this like this culture, like how would I be different? Would I be the same? Would I be different? How would I think? It's really eye-opening opportunities.
Yeah. So like in terms of career and like job opportunities, what like do you see, what are like the opportunities for someone who is moving, for an expat who is moving to Japan, or expat who is living already in Tokyo or in Japan?
Yeah. So this usually comes up a lot with spouses, especially because most people I meet who are professionals, they've already come for a job. So for people who are spouses, whether they're men or women, they are usually kind of having like this curve where they're trying to figure out their next career move. And I would say that if you don't speak Japanese, there's definitely probably not a lot of opportunities, especially if you're in like a very niche type of industry. So most of the things people get involved with are either maybe there's an international company that you've worked with before that has a Japan office. You might be able to find out if you can continue doing some of that work just from a different location. You might look into doing volunteer work. You might get involved with some charities and those types of organizations. I've seen some people maybe get involved with their child's school a little bit more. So, or, the flip side is also to start a business as well. Some people get involved with business. So I think it depends on kind of where you are at with your career. I have met people who have had to give up their career to move to Japan for their spouse. And so they definitely want to continue something. And I do think that those opportunities are available, especially if you can find maybe international or global companies that might have a department where the language is not mandatory. So you might not be doing client facing things. You might be doing more back office related work. Or internal international communication. I think that's a big element too. So there's opportunities there, but I would say that without the language, it could be a bit limited or very competitive.
So language is important. Yeah. So how long does it take? Like how long does it take to learn Japanese?
To learn Japanese, it's an ongoing process for sure. And that's some people who have been here for, 20, 30 years and they feel like they're still learning something. And again, there's many different variations of the language. So, but I mean, just to get some like basic survival Japanese and also maybe some of the basics, I would say probably within a year, you could really like learn enough to kind of get by and understand what the topic of a conversation is and maybe share some of your ideas, even if it's limited sentence structures that you can have. But once you start getting into more advanced levels, it could really continue on for years and years. And there's so many, of those Chinese characters that we use here in Japan, which are kanji, to learn. And it's kind of a never-ending situation to learn all of those alphabet structures.
Yes, but it's good to know that like after 1 year you can have a conversation. Yeah, you can express yourself. So this is good. This is a positive thing. Fantastic, Katheryn. Thank you very much for sharing all your experience and background with us. So tell us, like, what are your projects for the future?
Yeah, so right now what I'm working on is doing onboarding projects with international companies. So I've had a lot of experience doing things like, sometimes it's just cross-cultural training projects. Other times it might be orientation. In some cases, it could just be wellness related topics. But what I'm excited about working on now is being able to integrate all of those into onboarding projects for companies. So for example, if a family is transitioning to living in Japan, we can do maybe like a 6-month program, which would include a combination of orientation when they arrive, and then cross-cultural education training maybe within 3 months of their arrival, plus some wellness and work-life balance related coaching over those 6 months. So that's a really good, well-rounded process because it helps them cut through all of the information. They don't have to have information overload. They can kind of learn things over the space of time, and also make sure that I'm pushing them and encouraging them to make friends early on so that they're not falling into the trap of feeling really lonely and not having any connections here later on. So it really gives them like a good kind of runway when as soon as they've landed in Japan. So that sounds kind of funny when I say it. So you have a runway, sounds like you're going off, but after you've landed, you have another runway, basically to transition here. Yeah, and I do that both for corporations as well as individuals.
Yeah, and how people can connect with you. I know that you have a wonderful website and wonderful blog where we can read all the information about lifestyle and how to live in Tokyo and Japan. So where people can find you and connect with you?
Yeah, that's right. So on my website, which is thrivetokyo.com, I do have a kind of a blog section that has a whole list of trivia on being in Japan. So really random facts that you probably won't learn unless someone tells you, but once you know it, you can really connect with the culture a lot better. So there's a lot of fun things on that. And yeah, anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn, just under Katheryn Gronauer. I also have a page on Facebook, which is Thrive Tokyo. And so you can follow some of my updates there or just reach out to me directly via any of those platforms.
Fantastic, fantastic, wonderful. So thank you very much again for being with us today and sharing with us your tips about how to thrive in Tokyo. And I will put the link to website with the show notes so people can go and check it and connect with you. And yeah, thank you very much for listening to those who are listening or watching, if you are watching the video, and share with us what are your insights, what are your learning points from this interview, or questions, or your experience in Japan. So share in the comments, and I will be back soon with another fantastic episode. Thank you very much, Katheryn.
Yes, thank you so much.